What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Movie QJ review of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Now, as I mentioned in my previous review of Doki Doki Literature Club, I'm a fan of horror video games and YouTube videos that discuss horror video games. So, like Doki Doki Literature Club, it was only a matter of time before this game came onto my radar. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a point-and-click adventure game from 1995, and it is loosely based on the 1967 short story of the same name. I say loosely based because aside from the main characters' names and appearances and a few references to events from the story, the game is very, very different. I've placed a link to the audiobook of the original story in the description of this video, and if you're into creepy dystopic future stories, I would definitely give it a listen. Harlan Ellison himself does the reading, and he is very, very engaging to listen to. I'm going to give a brief summary of the plot of the short story now. It seems like an appropriate place to jump off and talk about the game. If you do want to listen to the story, skip to this timestamp. Otherwise, spoiler alert. Also, because I have no mouth and I must scream is really cumbersome to say over and over again, I will henceforth refer to it as InMains. InMains centers on a supercomputer called AM, which was constructed during the Cold War, achieves sentience, and begins its own separate war against man. It completely obliterates all life on the Earth in a nuclear holocaust, except for 5 seemingly random, poor saps. Ted, a former socialite and womanizer. Nimdok, a former Nazi doctor. Ellen, a former engineer. Gorister, a former trucker. And Benny, a high-ranking military officer. Former high-ranking military officer, excuse me. Now, you might be thinking, isn't AM a ripoff of Skynet? Well, the answer is no, because InMains came out in 1967, beating Terminator by almost 20 years. I would think it would be interesting to check in with James Cameron to see if AM influenced Skynet. Somebody do that and let me know in the comments, okay? Like send him an email or a memo or something. Anyhow, AM somehow grants these 5 poor saps immortality and spends all of his time tormenting them. That's all he does. He torments these 5 people. In addition to physical and psychological torture, even creature comforts such as ready access to decent edible food, hygiene, privacy, and even looking and feeling like a human being have been commandeered by AM to be used as torture devices. He distorts Benny into a half-human, half-ape and gives Nimdok the name Nimdok as a means of permanent mockery and humiliation for AM's amusement. He also, for reasons I still don't completely understand, I've listened to the story a few times, I still don't understand this, gives Benny a huge package. This comes up several times through the story. Don't believe me? I feel like you don't believe me. Alright, fine. Harlan Ellison, would you please tell us what Am did to Benny's dangling bits?
And the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. He was big in the privates.
Thank you for clearing that up for us. InMains follows the condemned 5 as they undertake a trek in search of canned food items. Their greatest wish, more so even than escape, is the sweet release of death. Along the way, the group is subject to the following. They're blown around in a hurricane, they're burnt to a crisp under a sun thing that Am has created, they're fed disgusting food, and they're attacked by a horrifying monster. We also learn that Am resents his sentience. He has the same grievous existence as the genie from Aladdin. I mean the animated one, not the shit show remake. Phenomenal cosmic power, itty-bitty living space. There's no way for him to end his own existence, no way for him to use his power, no way for him to travel, no way for him to experience genuine emotion. And so his is a miserable existence that has driven him stark fucking raving mad. He hence took the 5 people to vent his madness upon. I mean, you can't really blame him. After all, what else is he supposed to do? He's already obliterated all life on Earth, right? Even the plants. The group reaches the canned goods, and they are, in fact, actually there. Guess what's not there, though? Just guess. Okay, time's up. If you guessed a fucking can opener, then you're correct. And maybe as sick as Am. Get help. Benny completely breaks and he attacks Gorister, attempting to eat his face. Ted seizes the opportunity amongst this chaos, grabs a sharp stalactite or something, they're in the ice caves, and straight up kills the rest of his crew of people. But before he can commit suicide, before he can fall on the sword, so to speak, fall on the stalactite, Am transforms him into an amorphous blob without the means to move. In his blob form, he has no mouth. Not a particularly happy ending, right? Eternity as a blob with no mouth? However, Ted is happy to have put his four friends out of their misery and can no longer torment and torture them because, they're dead. I wonder what eternity with that level of cognitive dissonance must be like. I bet it sucks. In a way, Ted won, right? But ultimately, Am won. Ultimately, Am wins. With the plot of the story blown through, let's have a look at the video game. I just want to say that InMames is available to download and play at this time of this recording in December of 2020 from Great Old Games, Good Old Games. Let's call it GOG, G-O-G, and on Steam for a couple of bucks, and not really a ton of computer memory. Maybe watch the rest of the review and determine if it's worth it, if you want to try it out. The gameplay is simple enough. It's a point-and-click, adventure game from mid-1990s. This here is what the interface looks like. It contains everything you'd expect in a point-and-click adventure game, right? A big window where the action takes place, and then at the bottom, from left to right, you have a picture of your character, some action choices, and a group of items that you need to proceed along. That little disc at the right-hand side is how you save, load, and all that other shit. You may notice that the character window at the left-hand side is backlit with a bright green light. That little window is called your spiritual barometer, and it basically acts like a health meter. Your goal is to keep that thing lit up nice and green. This is especially important as you play the final level of the game, and honestly, it's a pretty cool idea. You navigate each character through their own personalized scenarios, devised by Am, that is based on key events of their pasts. Each setting contains NPCs that you must interact with, and presents you with decisions that you must make in order to advance the plot. These interactions and decisions often present you with a serious moral dilemma, and your actions determine what happens to your spiritual barometer. Believe me when I tell you that some of these decisions are messed up. God, Nimdok, for example, must decide whether to perform an unnecessary and potentially crippling surgery on an 8-year-old child. Ellen must confront a man who assaulted her in her past. And Benny must decide whether to intervene in a human sacrifice. Not exactly light reading. After each of the 5 scenarios are complete, you're presented with an endgame scenario in which all characters may or may not participate, and which may result in one of several multiple endings. At the time of this recording, I'm still playing through the endgames. Maybe I'll post an update when I finish. The game picks up at the same time the story does, 109 years after the characters were first appropriated, quote unquote. Am promises you rewards for successful completion of his little scenarios, including the complete shutdown of Am, escape, and the sweet release of death. However, as I'm sure you figured out by now, these scenarios were designed by Am as yet another means of sophisticated torment, and present each character with agonizing moral dilemmas based upon painful experiences from their pasts. Am scenarios are designed to elicit as much dread from the 5 characters, and ostensibly you as the player, as possible. If your spiritual barometer is not bright green, you know Am is getting the best of you. Why am I reviewing another video game? Because I happen to be playing it right now, that's why. And besides that, it's pretty cinematic. So let's get into the pros and cons lists. He is very, very good. He obviously really loves his character and his work as a whole. I don't mean that as an arrogant thing. I mean, he honestly is very into it. He takes it seriously. His portrayal of Am is charming and convincing, all while being terrifying and menacing. Am is an active participant through the story, and the personality that Ellison lends him makes the thought of Am constantly following you watching you, peeping over your shoulder, truly chilling. Probably the most effective part of the entire game, in my humble opinion. The settings look pretty cool and they feel genuinely surreal. Most of them combine natural settings such as forests and caves with artificial and even anachronistic looking components such as video screens, circuit boards, and computer terminals. There isn't really any music to speak of, but the ambient sound is creepy without being overwhelming. It's imposing without being pandering. The character sprites move in an apprehensive way, sometimes even appearing jumpy, displaying their fear of what may be beyond the next door or at the end of the next hallway. The characters' backstories are explored in great detail, much more so than in the short story, and they're all pretty interesting. I almost always found myself wanting to keep playing, if only to learn a little more about the characters. Bear in mind that I said almost always, though. That will become important later when we hit the cons list, which is happening right now. These two scenarios are boring and miserable. I don't mean that the content is miserable, I mean it's miserable to play because they're loaded with spots where you get stuck unless you bust out the walkthrough. They're not fun to play at all. I played the GOG version and it contains a couple of bugs. During Benny's scenario, as I loaded a save, Benny's sprite did not appear on the screen at all. So what did I have to do? Look it up. Thankfully, it was an easy fix, but, it's pretty fucking egregious, to have your character avatar not load with the rest of the screen. Ted, Ellen, and Nimdoc, thankfully, have better and more engaging scenarios. 3 out of 5 ain't bad, I guess. 5 out of 5 would have been better. Most of the puzzles in this game are bullshit. They are all difficult to solve, and some make absolutely no sense at all, that I can think of. Maybe I'm not smart enough, I don't know. I just think that the puzzles suck. One puzzle in Ellen's scenario involves picking up a yellow scarf. I was thankfully on my second pass at literally clicking on everything to see what happens, or else I never would have solved that one. Now check this out. You see that blue book in the character inventory at the bottom right? That's called the Psych Profile, and it's basically a badly needed hint book. Did you catch that? It's a built-in hint book. That's how fucked up these puzzles are. Now, is there a catch with this built-in hint book? Yes. Every time you use it, it drains your spiritual barometer. Why would they do that? I mean, it's basically mandatory. So that kind of fucks it up even further, the whole game. Even the built-in cheat book's not enough. Because not only are the puzzles shitty and fucked up, some of the screens themselves are shitty and fucked up. Have a look at this screen from Gorster's scenario. Okay, so typically when you move the crosshairs over an area where you can walk or talk to somebody or interact with some item, it lets you know. In this case, it turns green. This should keep you from getting permanently stuck, right? Right? Well, have a look at the very right side of this action window. When you move the crosshair there, nothing happens, which should signify that you cannot move beyond this point. Right? Wrong! This screen is what is actually to the right. I don't want to admit how long I fucked with this room before having to actually break out the walkthrough and look it up. But it was a while. Gorster's scenario is particularly rife with this kind of bullshit, but it appears throughout the entire game. The decisions that you have to make in this game are pretty disturbing, okay? They are. But I didn't find the gameplay overall to be genuinely frightening. Maybe if I were younger when I played it, it would have scared me. Maybe if I hadn't played like Doki Doki Literature Club or Resident Evil 2, or even another point-and-click game from the 90s called Phantasmagoria, it would have scared me. However, it didn't scare me. I found the short story to be bone-chilling, but not so much the video game. Just like in the story,
you can't win!
The only real way to win is to lose with the smallest amount of ramifications. This parallels Ted's fate in the short story, but doesn't really equate to a satisfying gaming experience, in my opinion. In an interview that I watched, Ellison himself said that the game was deliberately designed this way. He would only involve himself with the video game if the game was unwinnable and if it taught moral and ethical lessons to the player. He got his wish, and while I'm admittedly curious to see all of the endings, I don't appreciate the combined lack of terror and dread with a game that literally does not have an outcome to make the experience of playing it worth it. Even Phantasmagoria has the main character escape in the end. You know, if you do it right. So if you want a scary point and click adventure game, just play Phantasmagoria. That's about all I have to say about I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The game makes for a decent experience, and if you're a fan of this kind of game and you haven't played it yet, I'd recommend it. Why not? Fuck it. I've seen it receive rave reviews on game sites. I don't know if I fully understand why, but don't let me be misunderstood. I didn't hate it. I'd probably not go back and play it again just due to the aggravating, sometimes actually broken gameplay and the lackluster ending, but if you haven't played it, then try it out. Okay. Talk to you later.